tap on our
Okay,
YouTube channel. So we're now
can you
recording.
all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Um, okay, great. Well, so I will give you a little background about myself. I don't know if I have answers to any of those questions that everyone is asking. I am going through the transition myself, but I can start off by saying that it's personally for me, it's one of the best decisions I have taken, for reasons starting with I'm now finally, I think I'm doing what I wanted to do. But giving you a little bit of background, I did my bachelor's in psychology in 2001. And like any other 21-year-old, I was keen on making money. So I just took the next job that came my way. And I went into customer service, followed by about 7 years of sales in the media and telecom business. I did extremely well. I loved what I was doing. I loved where I was working, the kind of roles that I was doing. And then I moved to marketing for another 7 years with a big media conglomerate in India. And then about 10 years ago, I moved from India to UK. That was more my husband's career choice, and I just followed. I thought I'll take 6 months off, visit around Europe and spend some time taking time off from sales and marketing, and then go back to India and then continue my sales and marketing. So psychology was never anywhere in 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 my thoughts, except that I loved keeping up with it in terms of reading and just knowing what's happening in the field, etc. And then when I moved here, I had the opportunity to study. And I said, if I'm coming from a business background, that's what I know best. And I had options of every branch of psychology in front of me, so from clinical to occupational. But I thought if I really want to put my skills in use, my knowledge, and what I understand about business, it's best that I go into occupational psychology. But my first love personally was clinical psychology. And I won't say that has changed, but I think from when you're making career decisions, as much as you want to do something, for me, I had to even make sense that my skills match what I want to do next. So keeping those two in mind, I decided to study occupational psychology. I did that in 2015. I did my master's. Absolutely loved the research element, absolutely loved the fact that I could now put theory into practice. And I then moved on to do my PhD, and I'm in my final year of my PhD. And as a part of my PhD, I do research work. I also am a research specialist in another business school. I also do some consulting work with NHS, and I also do some psychometric work with another small startup. So, in essence, I'm now dabbling my hands into several things that I don't think I would have had the chance to do in the past. I don't know yet, because I'm in a transition, whether I would like to be one thing. Like, I don't want to just be an academic, I don't want to just be a consultant. If I had the choice now in my career, I would want to do a little bit of everything. And I won't say that's easy as a transition. It is something that takes a lot out of me, because I have to put on different hats in each role. But what works for me is that I have the confidence, I have the knowledge on how to have conversations, the stakeholders that I'm dealing with. All of that comes with from my past work experiences that I've had in different industries and different roles. And I'm using all of that now to have those conversations, to make sense of what's happening in the business, and then apply all the psychological knowledge and the theories that we learn in the process, and hopefully offer real solutions to what's happening out there. And that's my end sort of goal. I want to do more research so that I can use that and then apply that in practice. And I am now seeing that. I won't say I did that. I saw that in the last few years, but increasingly having those conversations, using your past knowledge and now what I'm learning through academia, I can actually see that I can put that into practice and offer solutions, as we call, or collaborate with people who have stuff that they want to get answers to. And that's essentially been my journey from sales, marketing, and now into academia and research and consultancy.
Brilliant. Very concise and very dynamic. And I love the fact that you're doing so many different research things, be it business schools, NHS, and a little bit psychometrics on the side, which I can definitely empathize with. And would you say what was the key transferable skills that you have developed before going into OccPsych, which really helped you to have these conversations, to do this research?
So the one thing that I learned early on, or rather was told by one of my previous managers, is having the right questioning skills, asking questions, asking. So if you were in a sales meeting or if you were in a marketing meeting, which is nothing to do with psychology as such, I mean, when I talk about OccPsych, we get a brief from a client and we just don't end there. We ask questions, we keep questioning what their intention is, what their end goal is, who their audience is. It's asking those right questions, developing that rapport with your stakeholder, whoever that is, whether it's the client in front of you or the end consumer. So in marketing, we had to deal with clients like Coca-Cola, and then we had one is the client on one end, and then there's a consumer on the other end. We ask questions to all the stakeholders to see what the end goal is for each one of them. And that questioning is what kept me intrigued, and that helps me even in my research, I would say. Just that I'm in that constant, I feel like a detective mode. I'm just like trying to solve questions that are going on in my head, and those questions I keep. So I think that's one skill that I've learned over the years. And I was told when I did my master's that I was one of the students in the class who had the maximum questions, and somehow that was appreciated. I don't know. So I would say be inquisitive.
So asking questions and key stakeholder management serves you well.
Yes, for me, it's worked so far from my past job as one of the skills that I use even in academia.
Excellent. And was anything there is particular challenge to you about OccPsych?
Uh, it is a challenge in the sense that when you start applying for, I think I heard Victoria mention that I would like to get into, I don't want to work for myself if I heard that correctly, and I would like to work in an organization or in a job as such. But and I find that a challenge, to be honest, because I may not have the relevant work experience. I may have the skills, but I may not, as when you see job descriptions and when you apply for jobs, there are things that they ask on there which they classify as relevant, and I may not have that relevant job experience. But I know that my skills serve me, and that's you have to get I hope that I get to the point where I can have that conversation. But it's that barrier that you have to cross, and I find that particularly challenging.
Yes. So the job descriptions. In my experience, one of the best things to do is to contact them directly and ask some questions as well,
Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not to be detained.
Yeah. Some of them do respond back and some don't. But I think you're right in saying that you just have to. Another thing that I think when you transition after a few years of work experience, you are okay. You're not shy of having those conversations. You're not worried what will be the other one thinking if you've been, if you bypass certain processes, because you've learned to do that over the years. You've learned to solve the problem by bypassing certain loopholes and getting to the end point. So yeah, I think that confidence really builds up when you've had the previous work experience.
Absolutely. So it's not only the skills, but it's also the confidence. So if you were confident before in your marketing
Definitely.
position, though the MSc might sometimes leave you at limbo as far as what to do next, you shouldn't still lose the confidence you had before as a professional.
Definitely. I would agree with that 100%.
Fantastic. And just one or two questions would anybody have for Deepali before we move on to the next speaker?
I'd be curious Sorry, please shut me up because I can talk forever. But I'm curious, as you've gone through the academic journey, did you feel that you had to do the doctorate in order to kind of have that bit more of a clarification when you're going into roles, to kind of have that academic background behind you in order to move into the field?
I would say no, clearly. I'm doing the doctorate because I absolutely love that research and the rigor and the science, which I had no knowledge about. So that was, I mean, yes, I had the work experience behind me, but I had no scientific or academic background. And when I did my master's, I absolutely enjoyed it. I loved the whole dissertation. It was a struggle because I came back to studying after 15 years, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And if you ask me honestly, I would love to do a second PhD. I mean, I just love the whole process of research. And so no, if in a simple nutshell, that was not the reason. I didn't want to do that extra academic. It's just a learning process for me, and I'm in that phase where I want to continuously learn. So, and I hope that doesn't go away. I hope I answered your
Oh,
question,
brilliant.
Abigail.
Thank you. No, you did. Thank you.
Can I jump in with another question for Deepali?
Go for it.
Hi, Deepali. So yeah, with regards to you going back to school, do you have any thoughts around doing a PhD part-time and getting into and transitioning into this kind of work? Or would you say that it's not feasible and it's better to focus solely on your academia and then transition into private or public sector?
So I'm doing my PhD full-time and working part-time, but I do have fellow colleagues and other PhD peers who are doing it the exact opposite, where they're working full-time and doing their PhD part-time. My only PhD is something that you have to have continuous motivation. There'll be the downs, and there'll be times when you don't want to do it. So if I was to do it part-time personally, I think I would need that strength and motivation for longer. I would rather finish it sooner and not have to continuously. So I know of people who are doing for PhD for over 6 and 7 years. So I'm just thinking in my head, for 7 years, I have to find that constant motivation to do my research in that timeline, and all the other things that life throws at you. So my personal preference is to finish that sooner, in a short span of time instead of prolonging that, because the two skills that you need in terms of finishing a PhD is organizing and time management. The rest you can get support, you can get all of that, but and imagine constantly trying to manage your time and trying to be organized and compartmentalize your life, into different aspects of your PhD and your work life, and doing that for 7-8 years. I find that particularly challenging. So in my personal preference, I would prefer doing it full time and part-time work, and then finish it and then go into full-time work after you've done your PhD. But that's just a personal choice. I mean, circumstances can be different for everyone, right? Somebody may have to do a full-time job for whatever reasons, or wants to do a full-time job, and but I'm lucky enough that I can do my PhD full-time and do the other things as a part-time.
Absolutely. And the question here is that it's a vacation, so you can study your whole life in psychology. It's not likely you get your OxPsych MSc or a PhD and off you go
And
for
then it's
50
over.
years straight until retirement. No deviation from the good old chartered OxPsych route. But I know people who got clinical psychologists. I know people who became educational psychologists, moved from clinical to occupational. I mean, one of the best friends I work with and colleagues, she spent 60 years in the field by now, or probably about 50. She's a chartered clinical, chartered occupational, and a therapist. So you can continuously learn and develop professionally. Just one more question, and then we'll move on to Sharon. So Nicole, over to you.
Oh yeah, it's more of a process question rather than sort of a PhD question. If you're talking about experiencing and going into work, what do you have any tips around how you could relate your experience to some requirements that you would need as an OP? So was it that you sort of sat down and wrote a list of the current skills that you had? Like how did that work for you?
I mean, I won't say I sat down and wrote certain things, but in terms of making plans, you do that in your, at least I did that in my work, like, you know, making a business plan, making a project plan, see, like you have a client, you have a client project, you start from the beginning, which is your brief, your design, and then you come to the end goal, which is delivering the whole project, and you have different stakeholders. So that I saw a PhD, or, you know, in that same light as to, in terms of the process, the planning,
Yeah.
uh, and who are the people who are going to help you in that process. So even when you're in your work environment, it's not you alone who's going to solve that client or customer brief that you've got. There's several other people who will help you in the process to make that, to meet that goal. And you have to find that even in your PhD, or when you're looking for jobs, you need that strong support system around you. And it's a constant process. In my personal experience, I have to constantly reach out to people to get that sort of help and support, whether it's people in the field or whether it's people in academia. It's having that constant dialogue. I mean, and I didn't do it consciously. I just, now in hindsight, I realized that that's what I'm doing. That was
Yes.
not a, that was not
Okay.
a plan.
Okay, no, that's really
That
helpful.
helps.
Yeah, no, that does, thank you. That's a lot of what I do already, so the skills are there, it's just drawing out those, I guess. So yeah, no, that's really
And
helpful.
talking about them, crying babies get milk is all I know.
Brilliant, thank you.
Absolutely, and being confident about them as well. Thank you so much, Deepali, and we'll also have time for networking and more questions. But on this note, just over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Deepali. So my journey's been quite different, but actually quite a lot of the things that Deepali's mentioned do really resonate. So they're actually, interestingly, there's some similarities. So I started off actually as a nurse. So I sort of left my hometown of Liverpool and headed to London to sort of be trained as a nurse in the 80s, and really did that for about 15 years and became sort of a junior ward sister in an oncology unit. I love my job. I was really passionate about it. But I just felt it wasn't something that I wanted to do absolutely forever. I really felt like maybe I wasn't getting the, I guess, the cognitive stimulation that I really felt that I needed at that time. And my career transition probably happened quite by accident in some ways, in that I literally went for lunch with someone who at the time was the head of training in a hospital I worked with, great guy named Steve, and I said to him, you know, I as much as I love my job and I like these parts, but it's probably not a career for life for me, and I'm not sure where I'm going to go. And he basically gave me a coaching session without me even realizing it. So he asked me about what my interests and what did I really love, the bits I loved about my job, what skills I thought I'd picked up, and what my passions were. And it was him who actually introduced me to the world of occupational psychology. He literally came into work a week later and had these leaflets for me and connected me with the BPS, and he was really generous. And that's when I started exploring occupational psychology. So for me, it meant going back to school, so going back to university, doing a psychology degree, and then an MSc, which was quite daunting. I was definitely the mature student in the room at that time. But being quite honest, it's been really fantastic. So I did my MSc, and after doing my MSc, I had a little sort of during my MSc, I got a job in HR. So I basically had a part-time job for Boots the chemist, funny enough, sort of in their recruitment team. And the reason I did that was because, like some of you guys who've spoken before, I was quite nervous about going into what felt a very different world of work, and I felt my skills were really relevant, or I didn't feel they were at the time. You soon realize actually you've got some great skills that are transferable. So I did that job for a while, and then I was also doing one of the lecturers at the time at the university had a consultancy, and I was doing quite a lot of work for them as well. So I started to build up my skills and my confidence really through that part-time work. And then I stayed in academia and had a research assistant post for a while. And the reason I did that was because my interests in nursing were actually around, I had a small team at the time, and I was really fascinated about how some of them are really motivated and come into work, really, passionate and wanted to deliver. And then others, quite honestly, just came in for the money and then really weren't that committed when they were in work. So I became quite fascinated about how we design jobs, how people are motivated, that sort of thing. So when I had an opportunity to work with a professor at the time who was doing a lot of research, applied research, going into financial services, looking at organisational design and that sort of stuff. So I did that for about 18 months. Phenomenal experience. So it was really learning about that, what was real world research and the application of it, and then the science behind it at the time, so it was validation. So that was really great. And then I thought, I'm going to do a PhD. So I started a PhD, did it for about 3.5 years, and then actually was really quite hungry to get out into the world of work. And I got offered a fantastic opportunity actually to work in Whitehall. So I thought, well, I'm going to start this job and then I'm going to finish my PhD at the same time. A year later, I realised for me, it was absolutely impossible. I was trying to work full time. I was a mum, and finishing off your last year of PhD, it became impossible for me. So in the end, actually, I didn't submit my PhD, despite actually starting it, the write-up of it. I've got a first draft still on my shelf. And I just really, from there, I literally just have been working. So I continued my early career in organisational design. I was sitting in a work team that was also doing quite a lot of assessment work, so obviously got involved in that, and my interest in that really grew, and I worked with various sort of government departments and grew my skills. And then after that, I worked in financial services, so I was global head of assessment for a bank, and then moving into sort of my sort of current role, which was sort of more consultancy, but very much focused around assessment. But my passion is really about inclusion through assessment, so how we can create really a level playing field for people and on all of our differences, and I absolutely love my job. So I think the three things I would say to somebody, which is really what the person who helped me think about it, was really assess your skills, so assess your interests. So what part of your job that you're currently doing do you absolutely love? So for me, it was understanding what motivates people, what gets them out of bed in the morning, what makes them what makes them want to go above and beyond, really what they're paid for. Think about your transferable skills. I would say that you've probably got a lot of them and you probably don't appreciate it, so maybe work with someone to work through them. And then the third thing would be prepared to study and upskill. So like what Nikita said, I don't think, for me, it's not just a matter of doing your MSc. I think for me, it's being on a continuous journey of learning, updating your work, your thinking. Be willing to read research papers and think about how they apply to your world of work and what they mean today.
Brilliant. I absolutely love just how wide the level of experience is. Everything from head of assessment to nursing and anything in between. Quite a range. And the fact is that first draft of PhD is still there on your shelf. Hopefully more from aesthetically pleasing rather than haunting you. That's the only thing I hope.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I think our experience being PhD for obviously the speaker previously, because having now been almost 20 years down that journey, I would actually say you don't need a PhD to be an Oxite. I think if you want to work in academia, you definitely do. I'd say in the real world of Oxite, get chartered. I think that's been really valuable. So you get and do that quite early in your career, so you get that breadth of experience in it. Then you really feel where your appetite and your passions and your strengths are through that chartership experience. So I'd encourage people to do that. And if you want to do a PhD, do it, but you really don't need to have a PhD in the world of work.
Yes, and if you want to be a lecturer, you can still be in academia even without a PhD. I mean,
Yeah,
recently, ironically, I was asked to lecture at the university. I would never get in for my master's because of my grades. So that was really ironic when they dropped me an email, would you like to read lectures here? And I was like, why not? So you never know how things will play out.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Though chartership and other things, I'm very happy you highlighted, Sharon, that people forget about chartership. It's not only a box ticking exercise. It's supposed to give you experience of a breadth of different things occupational psychologists do. It's like a taster buffet.
Yes.
You learn it hypothetically in your MSc, and then you try it out practically as part of your chartership.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what I found. I found I was quite hungry early in my career. I mean, I still am, to be fair, but I really thought I want to try these different elements. So I think I would encourage people to try and expose themselves to as much as they can quite early on, and obviously pre your chartership, try exploring some of those areas themselves. I'd say as a first job, HR, working in a HR department is actually pretty good, because you can get exposed to all of quite a lot of those elements that we look at for occupational psychology. Obviously not all of them, but certainly a lot of them, because a lot of HR, you might touch your L&D, you might touch organizational design and everything that, from one end of the spectrum to the other. So that was a really positive experience for me as well. And I know a lot of oc psychs who've taken that, when you can't get your first oc psych job, those that have taken a HR job have been able to use those skills within their role.
Absolutely. And it's just a step. Sometimes people go, oh, if I take a junior role in HR, is this it for me? No, it's like, it's a step. It's actually a really interesting way you get to learn from a in-house side of things.
Absolutely.
It's always a step. But talking about steps, does anybody have any questions for Sharon before we move on over to Mike?
I have a question, if I could.
Wow, Mike, I can circumnavigate it there. Yeah, makes sense. Go for it.
It sounds like from your story that you've worked in quite a few different aspects of the field. You mentioned like recruitment and assessment and things like that as well. Like, was it by choice, or was it kind of just exploring the breadth of kind of the opportunities in this field?
To be honest, Mike, I've just rolled with it. So with my MSc, I loved all the wellbeing stuff. I absolutely loved it. It was quite hard at that time to get a job in that area. It wasn't quite cool then. It's obviously very cool now, because there's a lot of work in that area. But so organizational design sort of spoke to that for me. So that was, and I started as a research assistant, because that's what I just found that intrinsically interesting. And then my first job enabled me to use those skills. So I worked at the Home Office in Whitehall for my first job. But to be fair, the assessment piece just came because there was almost a job opportunity there at the time. I got invited to apply for a job by a HR director, and then I sort of sat with another team, and then that's where that interest comes. So if I'm honest, there's been no big master plan. It's just been, oh, I like that, what's over there, and oh, that looks interesting, what's over there. And that curiosity, I think is personally has really paid off for me.
Sure, great, thank you.
Thank you for such a wonderful question, Mike. And Sharon, thank you for your honest reply, because sometimes when people enter their first role, they always think like 10, 20 years ahead, what's going to happen to me then? But you don't know, because you don't know the factors and the randomness of this profession. Of like, there might be an opportunity here and a conversation there, which will lead to something 5 years down the line. It's just, when you look back on it, it's like luck and randomness as well as knowledge.
It's true. Yeah, it's really true.
Fun and games. Thank you so much for that, Sharon.
Thank you.
On that note, considering Mike, we already have you spotlighted, over to you. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Nikita. And thanks for the other two speakers who spoke before me. I'm significantly less educated than our previous two speakers. So hopefully I can offer a little insight into that field, given that my degree is actually in organizational behavior, same coursework and everything, but because my undergraduate wasn't in psychology, my degree is in that as opposed to Occ Psych. So I was thinking about for the topic today, and was going to begin my career where I typically do, kind of post-university. But I think as I was reflecting on it, it's actually relevant to start, when I first entered the working world, quite young, as a teenager even. I always worked in the exciting world of home insulation and roofing. So I spent all my summers and breaks doing that. And I think, as we're hearing from the other speakers, that, you know, anything that you might not seem as even relevant to your career path to today, that you always find a way to kind of connect those pieces. And looking backwards, you kind of see where that red line runs through the whole career path that you take. But on the more traditional front, so I went to university in Chicago. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from the States. And I studied political science and philosophy. I then went to work for the federal courts in Chicago in pretrial services. So I spent several years there working with people who were accused of federal crimes. And in the very slow US legal system, there's the process of preventing people to have to be incarcerated before they're actually convicted of a crime. We go through a process where they're interviewed, and, you know, you assess if there's any risks to themselves or the community, to kind of be able to keep people to not be incarcerated before that time. So I got to interview and work with a lot of very interesting people, a lot of people who've done some bad things or were accused of doing some bad things. But at the end of the day, what my 9 to 5 usually consist of was testing urine samples and chasing people who didn't want to show up to their appointments. So while still very exciting and great, you know, the true down-to-earth aspects of the job are a lot less exciting than it sounds. So as I said, I worked there for several years in Chicago. And I think, as the other two speakers have noted, the personal life often factors into this as well. So my wife at the time, similar to Deepali's story with her partner kind of leading the move to the next place, had an opportunity in London. So I followed along, and before we moved, kind of had that reflection phase as to what I wanted to do with the next step in my career, and did the, now that I've learned it, the system of, you know, literally getting a piece of paper and drawing, you know, what interests you with your current role, you know, what would you like to be doing more of, what have you not done yet of that you'd like to, and then exploring the different career paths within that field. And that's how I discovered the world of occupational psychology. I didn't even know it existed before that point, to be perfectly honest. But I think a lot of the things I was doing working for the courts, you know, with interviewing people, you know, trying to help people to get and maintain employment, kind of lended itself to that field. And it really excited me. So moved to London and did my MSc at Birkbeck in the evenings. And then shortly thereafter started working part-time as well for a consultancy firm in London. And the primary focus of that consultancy was employee engagement and leadership development. So while working with them and then doing my studies, I then stayed with that firm for the past 5 years. So progressed through different roles in that organization, and really enjoyed what I did and the colleagues that I worked with there as well. And I see the questions too, and I'll touch on it. I know someone asked about employee engagement as well, so we can do questions on that too if you have any specifics. But yeah, once I've got my degree and then started working full-time for that firm, began working in different aspects of, you know, your traditional employee engagement surveys and the analysis off the back of that, as well as one-to-one leadership coaching, helping people work through psychometric test results, 360 feedback, team coaching, and especially so more in the last years working with diversity inclusion initiatives as well. And on the question about how difficult was that transition, if I'm perfectly honest, I found it quite smooth, because I went into it kind of wholeheartedly. I don't know why is the word that came to mind, is because I was genuinely interested in this field and excited for the opportunity to start working with it quite quickly. So I kind of just jumped in head first. And as Nikita said, you know, took a step down for that first role, you know, just coming in as a part-time intern, essentially, with that first role, just to get that experience when still doing my studies, and saying yes to a lot of things. And I think that, you know, kind of lends itself to the field itself. And I think a lot of people here, and what we've heard about, is that natural curiosity. And I think that interest in working with people. I mean, that is why we're in this game, so to speak, is that we enjoy working with people, you know, the core fundamentals of research skills and statistical analysis and interviewing is applicable to so many other fields and roles. But I think the reason people find themselves attracted to this field specifically is that direct impact with people and working closely with people. So I think that kind of also touches on the question of, how do I use, in some cases, several decades of experience to shift into roles specifically into this field. And it's using that right language. I think Nikita touched on as well, the difficulty often of even finding the right job titles or roles in this field. You're typing into LinkedIn keywords like culture or leadership or occupational development and seeing 15 roles that aren't applicable to you for every one that is. But I think that's another part that, at least from my own experience in this field, was just to be open to new possibilities, because even just coming in perhaps as an entry-level role or lower than what you had in your previous career, if you're able to do that. Obviously there's other constraints as well, because there's financial implications, of course, for that too. But to be able to kind of transition into that and just learn as much as you can as quickly as possible, because it's quite amazing how open people are as well. It's the other thing I've learned, is that most people, if you ask them a question, will be happy to help you. And if I've ever had anyone, either my colleagues or even with clients or just other people, such as through the side pub events and things such as that, I've never really experienced anyone reluctant to reach out and to answer a question or to help with things. So I guess those are my kind of key takeaways. And if I can end with something that stuck with me from my studies, is your career isn't a ladder, it's scaffolding. So a lot of people living in London, you see scaffolding every day. It goes left, right, up and down, side to side. And it may feel like you're going down or sideways, but at the end of the day, you end up where you need to go. And when you look back, those connections kind of make more sense at the end of the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. I absolutely love the fact that you started with roofing to begin with.
I didn't recognize that. I love full circles. Yeah, well done.
And there's another meta circle that in Russian, to say that, you're under mental stress, is to say my roof has started moving.
Really?
So yes, or
Okay.
or you lose insanity, is to say, the roof has gone. So there's also that connection. So roof psychology, maybe there's something there. It depends how Freudian you want to get. But we're not here for that. But thank you so much for that, Mike. Any questions for Mike?
No questions, but just a comment. It's fascinating to hear you, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I had a question. You mentioned that you, in part of the various things that you've done since your degree, a big focus has been on, well, not a big focus, you just mentioned it a few times, about coaching. And even though I'm only halfway through my degree, I'm also thinking there are kind of additional kind of practical skills that might be quite helpful to have in the workplace. Did you feel like did you pursue additional kind of training and coaching, or is that something you've learned through experience? Do you have any kind of advice for, someone like me who's transitioning and thinking that might be a useful skill?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the world of coaching, because as we know, everyone's a coach now on LinkedIn. So it's distinguishing kind of what it is that you can offer independently from other people. In my own case, that was using the kind of a data-driven approach. So as far as additional training, it was getting trained in various psychometric tools that we used as part of those coaching programs. And also having an internal mentor at the organization I was with who helped me learn skills in that space, and was really open to me kind of jumping in and working with people quite early in the process to start coaching with them as well. If your organization offers any form of development and that's at all relevant to it, I just suggest jumping on that, because it's always better if someone else pays for it. I guess what I'm trying to say is what type of coaching you specifically are wanting to look at, whether it's leadership coaching or life coaching or, any other of those different fields, to specifically get into that space to distinguish yourself and also make sure that, you're actually offering that value.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah.
talking about qualifications, I very much agree with Mike. It's much better when other people pay for them because
Definitely.
they can get pretty pricey. And I've been selling psychometric qualifications for like 10 years now. And my main advice is, if you want to learn about personality, get a book. The only reason when it's worth getting psychometrically qualified is when you have a client who's willing to buy your work with that particular psychometric tool.
Yeah.
Because one of the sad truths about world of psychometrics, a very large proportion of people who attend qualifications, especially independent coaches, never use that tools ever after getting qualified. So you just spend 3K on something you're not going to use. There's better ways to spend £3,000, people. That's my main advice. Do something nice. Or like, if you want to learn about personality, there's a great book called Why You Are Who You Are by Great Courses on Audible. It's one Audible credit. It's probably best value for money you can get on personality. And always haggle, always. Never accept the first price, ever. It's just there for show. Whenever, I quoted people price for a qualification and they said, yeah, that's fine. And I was like, what, you're not going to haggle? I always feel like that character from Monty Python, come on, haggle. What? How much for the gourd? So haggle, don't accept the first price, and always see how the tool or training will incorporate into your style. Because quite often one of the key reasons why the coaching qualifications don't take up, well, in my experience, psychometric, is that it's not in line with that person's style, because we all have an individual style of coaching, work, however you want to call it, in this line. And this qualification, that particular tool is not in line with your style, you're not likely to use it. So make sure
that's
that's
a really good point on the different styles. I think because my wife works as a coach as well, and she overheard me on a session once and had good feedback from my client. And then, her being in the other room in the times of COVID and hearing a bit, I asked her, how do you think that went? She goes, fine. And then she was really quiet. And then about an hour later, she goes, I wouldn't call that coaching. You were more consulting and you were offering. I'm like, okay, well, that's your opinion. Like, this is what we were doing. So it is, there is no right answer, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah, I sometimes get text messages from my partner. If she overhears me, it's like, you're entering preacher mode again. Text on my phone. So yes, that's kind of, it's fun to get a review as well. And just one of the key points that I feel, Mike, you made is about connecting. And if you ask people questions, psychology is a really friendly bunch. As one of my colleagues says, we're an alcoholics club with a psychology problem. And but we're friendly genuinely, and we all care about what we do. Very few of us are in sales positions here or selling widgets. I feel psychology is a vocation in the traditional sense. It's a calling, and we share that. So connect with people in the industry. So one of the things on that note, if you want to connect with people on this call, just type in your LinkedIn into the chat, or just your name. And another thing is, we recently did a little experiment on LinkedIn of people just saying who wants to connect, and we have over 100 people, around 100 people on this LinkedIn link willing to connect. So you can just go through and connect with all of them. And as far as searching for particular job titles, yeah, psychology, that there's so few roles in occupational psychology. Recently, I read a job ad that actually made me swear at my computer. It was like talent specialist. And third, I kid you not, third passage down said, we're looking for a passionate and determined MSc graduate in occupational psychology. I'm just like, why didn't they call it MSc occupational graduate job? Why is it some talent specialist, But this is why we created the hashtag PsychTalent on LinkedIn, so people can tag psychology related jobs. And if you find any consultancies, even if you're studying right now and there's no jobs, reach out to people working in those consultancies for a chat. Start up building that network now. Don't wait for when you graduate. But probably my partner will give me a text soon that I'm entering preacher mode. So any questions or for any of our speakers?
Hi, yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Hi, yes. I had a question for Mike. I'm also American, actually, and I wanted to know, did you face any barriers with regards to not being chartered? Like a chartered psychologist or anything like that?
Personally, no. From working as a consultant, I was okay without it. But I had colleagues who were and had the need come up. It might have been something I'd pursued. But going back to the very practical reason of it was just something I didn't want to pay for if I didn't need it. And because I had the job that didn't require it, I didn't go down that route. But I agree with what everyone else said, that if it's something that is required for a particular position or that can open more windows, to definitely pursue it. But personally, no, I didn't have issues with that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, chartership is particularly a stickler in UK if you want any government-related job. Occupational psychologists, they're usually really keen that you are chartered, or consultancies that work actively with government departments. That's the biggest people who put an accent on chartership.
I think it's worth noting, in my experience as well, if you do get chartered, you do get paid a bit more money. So you know, your starting salary tends to be higher and that sort of stuff. And even if you're not chartered, if you can just say you're working towards it, so you know, it can be quite a long process for some people, because you know, you might not have an opportunity to get the skills required, but working towards it is usually good enough for a lot of roles.
Yeah, and they might also pay for it. Oh yes, Jessica.
No, sorry, I just thought that was a pause, so I was going to ask my question. I was actually for Sharon. I'm actually also in the transition from clinical setting, so I work as a nurse, into kind of organisational psychology. So I'm doing my master's, and it was quite a specific question around how you found the transfer of like the clinical setting into. You said HR was one of your first roles. Yeah, and how you found that transition and any kind of advice you might have.
Yeah, so I think whilst the others have said they found it quite easy, I find it quite hard, if I'm honest. But if I'm brutally honest now, reflecting on it, I think that it was hard because I was not very confident and I was scared, and I felt like, oh, my job had been so different, and you know, I can't do it, and all of those things. So if I'm honest, it was a lot of self-doubt, because you know, I was fortunate, as Nikita said, that I think for me, I reached out to people, and people are kind, and I spoke to some people, and they offered a lot of reassurance, and it was about thinking about those skills. So as a nurse, you have to be curious about people, and learning. You know, certainly when I was a nurse, and I'm sure it's the same today, you are applying medical research to real world issues and drugs and drug reactions, and you have to know your stuff. It's not pumping fluff and pillows. It actually can be quite a technical role. And really, Oxite's the same. You're taking research, you're applying it to real world experience. It's about people. Occupational psychology is all about people, how people work in the workplace. As a nurse, it's all about people. It's all about, you know, So for me, actually, there was, in reality, a lot of overlap. If I'm honest, I couldn't see it at the beginning. But it was very much sort of an imposter syndrome for me. I think I just felt I can't really do this. So yeah, I think be confident, be more confident. You'll have a lot more skills than maybe you appreciate, and I'd encourage you to be confident in that and reach out to people who are Oxites, who maybe a bit more experienced, and can help you see some of that.
Yeah, thank you. It's super encouraging just to hear your transition and your journey through it. Because I think even in the masters, I totally relate with the imposter syndrome. You're like, how is this going to relate? But yeah, thanks. That's really helpful.
I think the other thing is, when it's a second career, for me, going back to uni, I thought everyone's so clever and I'm really not. And oh, look how eloquent they are, and they know this, and they have all these questions. Honestly, it's be confident in your own abilities, I would say. I think I would say, you know go and do your work, be the best you can, and don't be put off by people who look cleverer and better, because often they're not. It's just that some people are better at coming across initially, and often it's confidence. It's about believing in yourself.
Great.
Excellent. So it's about people, and it's important to believe in yourself. Very much agree about that. And masters can make you feel kind of discombobulated. And you're right. Some people say, they present things more eloquently or better at presenting or more confident. And recently I was actually thinking about the question of confidence in psychology. And it's a double-edged sword that, yes, you can seem, let's say, you're more likely to be perceived as somebody who knows what they're doing. And recently I was thinking, why the hell did I go down the master's route and the graduate? 7 years of my life gone. When my job title is a psychometrician. I'm a psychometrician. If anybody asks, that's what I do. In order to be called a psychometrician, I could have attended a 3-day qualification in UK and registered with the BPS RKTU. And I was thinking, why? I could have done it in 3 days. And I realized that, what the joke is, if you ask a psychologist any questions, they'll answer with depends. And I realized it's not a joke. It actually is. Because the thing is that the 7 years of education, what it gave me is a context in which personality fits, or ability assessments. And they can, what's a desirable trait? Well, it depends on so many different variables. And your degrees in education and your work experience allows you to have a much more broader perspective on what factors and variables it can depend on. So rather than attending a 3-day course. So that has its own desirability. So it's also having an open mind, and being not confident sometimes is okay. The question is, are you curious? And being honest with clients as well. So yeah, any other closing remarks or any thoughts, questions before we wrap up and just have random conversations and networking as we usually do on a Friday evening?
It's Carol here. I think I'd just like to say thank you, because the one thing that shone through from all 3 speakers has been how passionate you are, and it's just been lovely hearing your enthusiasm for the role. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah. So it's actually for Mike, Sharon, or Deepali, and coming from a place where I have broad experience in various countries, and was potentially wanting to see this as a career where I can move around as well worldwide. Do you guys think that it's recognized, like I'm from Canada, and organizational psychology tends to be organizational behavior. And so, and depending on the market, it tends to either be saturated or not. But what would you guys think about the global opportunities and where it can bring us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to feed into that, given that I've kind of worked in a lot of places. I think that's one of the main benefits of this field as well. Personally, I mean, now I live in Denmark now, so it's taken me to that route as well. So you are right insofar as that, the different certifications and maybe titles that used to people describe it. I know in the States, they often call it industrial organizational psychology, but it's just kind of becoming familiar with the different phrasing used in that location, and also just building a network as quickly as possible through events such as this, and just reaching out to people, when applying for roles, immediately following up with a LinkedIn invite, because you never know, you might not get the role, but there's only so many jobs out there, and it's great to see what they're posting, or you never know when your paths may cross again. So yeah, I think it's been great, both from that sense of actually physically, living and working in different places, but also from the consultancy side, I did a fair bit of traveling and working with people all over the world. So there's that benefit to it as well, if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks for the insight.
Excellent. Deepali, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I'm also from another country. I've moved here, and I can completely see myself going to a whole other country and still doing what I'm doing. So I don't think the role I don't think OxPsych has a boundary. I mean, there's, when it comes to work and people, they're everywhere. It's just putting yourself in that context when you are working in a certain environment, and then understanding what that context is, and then applying all the information and knowledge we have to that context. So yes, there will be a learning curve, but I think that's the exciting bit, right? When you are working in another country, in another culture, you have to learn that and then use all the passion and the knowledge that you have to apply it. So I go back to the same thing about that curiosity and continuous learning, because if you put yourself in those different positions in different cultures and different roles in different countries, you are going to keep that continuous learning aspect of within you to keep that professional and personal sort of growth that you're looking for. I personally don't think OccPsych or this field of ours has a boundary. And I'm increasingly seeing that. And I think the one good thing that the pandemic has done is shown that light to us, that it is beyond just the territory or the geographical boundaries that you're living in.
Completely. And I'm just also curious, Sharon, considering you worked for, as you mentioned, assessment for a bank. So I guess it was a global organization.
Yeah, it was actually. For me, I just think, does the science apply to a different context? It's the science of work, so it would naturally, have a global application. I've not actually physically worked from another country, but my only insight would that be if you wanted a job in the States, then where I guess earlier I was saying you don't need a PhD unless you want to work in academia. That's very much a UK thing. My understanding would be that if you want to be an OccPsych in America, then it's more typical to have a PhD. So, but in terms of the actual job, the science is the same, to be quite honest. Obviously, the context or cultural context is different, but that's only got to be interesting, hasn't it? So how that science applies in different contexts.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. It's one of those roles that definitely would have global application.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have quite a few connections and networks who want to work for big four consultancies because now they have like big OccPsych departments, BTY, Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and they just travel the world on different locations. They might get a secondment in like Singapore and move over there or somewhere else because if the first language of a multinational is English and your background is occupational psychology or industrial or business or organizational, it is about people. And therefore the world's your oyster because there's dissatisfied people with their jobs everywhere. Otherwise would be out of a job. And there's selection challenges and there's engagement challenges and well-being challenges. And each country is slightly different potentially, but also quite a lot of common ground. And that's why it's so important to connect with professionals all over the world. And right now, just building on Deepali's point about the pandemic, right now, borders and distances, it's just like magic because you can connect with anybody across the world in an instant. It's quite crazy. And on these calls, we can have people from US, Canada, Japan, etc. And it really doesn't matter. We all have the same size Zoom window. And yeah, people's mindsets have changed in that regard a bit.
I think another thing, and like Deepali said as well, is that openness when working with other cultures too, in that, not coming in and saying, this is the right way to go about it. There are certain things that are universally true, but not everything works. And that works for both different organizations as well as different countries or cities even. So it's just keeping that open perspective and, listening to actually what the people there are experiencing as well.
Oh, yes. As one of my friends said, if a client feels heard, that's half the job done.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I think it's only very, very interesting when you put yourself in these different contexts, because that learning that you have is just, personally for me, when I moved from India to here, it's been 10 years that I'm in UK, but I still feel like I'm just learning. It's amazing. And I think if we get those opportunities, I would grab them with both my hands to put myself in different contexts. And it's fascinating.
Fascinating. It's a continuous learning. You can never know I know psychology because you can't know it. It's it's like even occupational psychology or psychometrics. It's a scientific methodology as best as we can to help to understand ourselves as a species. That's a perpetual workshop here, man. It's never going to stop. That's what makes it so wonderful. You can keep learning, keep looking at things different ways, and sometimes realizing when you look back that you were quite an idiot. Like if I compare how I use psychometrics now to how I used it before, I was like, oh, that was pretty silly of me. Some of the things I asked, but that's the beauty of development. And talking about the beauty of development, I just want to thank everybody for attending today. It's always great to have you all. We have career sessions every first Friday of the month. It's the same Zoom link, so which you're on now. So you don't need to necessarily register for events, just copy and paste the Zoom link. So next one is also going to be about second careers. So that will be 7th of, where's the calendar? Man, that's the thing, you know, give me a psychometric profile. It's easy. Asking to come up with dates, that's extremely hard. So 7th of May.
Wednesday.
Low on conscientiousness.
Oh man, low on conscientiousness, high on openness and neuroticism, joy. This is why I embrace the unemployability of my personality. Yeah. And
that makes you lovely to work with.
Well, you know, that's one way to look at it. And then the next one in June, 4th of June, is all going to be about graduate positions in OcPsych. So we're going to have a panel of people who got graduate jobs this year or entry-level jobs, and they will be sharing with us their experiences and what to look for. As well as we'll be doing day in a life of videos, more advice on jobs. But for now, please follow Psych Talent, connect with each other on LinkedIn. And thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Sharon, Deepali, and Mike. And I hopefully see you next time. I'm just going to stop recording.